Cody Powell was one of the first to describe network organization as an intermediary form between hierarchies and markets, and he elaborated its distinct logic of exchange. You can find his paper in the additional readings of the week. There, Powell argues that network organizations are neither market nor hierarchy. They entail more enduring diffuse connections than markets, but more reciprocal and egalitarian arrangements than hierarchies. So let's look at an adapted table from Powell's 1990 article where these forms of organizing are compared. I've reordered and slightly edited the table for ease of presentation here, but Powell goes through a variety of organizational features and processes and constraints, and then he contrasts them for each type. So you'll see market, network form of organization, and hierarchical forms of organization. Most of you recall what a hierarchical form of organization is. It's a centralized organizational chart with levels of reporting that winnow down like a pyramid from the top. And in these systems, the normative basis of association is an employment relation of reporting. And the means of communicating entail established routines. Conflict is resolved by administrative oversight, and there's little flexibility in procedures. In these contexts, worker commitment to the firm is medium to high, the tone of the climate is formal and bureaucratic, and actor preferences are dependent on the firm and its centralized actors. At the opposite spectrum, we have a market form of organization, and there, associations are guided by formal contracts and transactions. The means of communication consist of pricing and prices. Conflict is resolved by bargaining and haggling. Here, flexibility is very high, but commitment is low. Everyone is out for themselves without constraint, after all. And the tone here is based on precision and suspicion of competition, and actor preferences are independent of each other, just as you would expect in a free market. Many scholars in economics view organizational fields in this way, and they have models following these logics. Between the two poles here is network organization. It has characteristics that distinguish it from market and hierarchical forms of organization. Through network organization, firms seek out complementary strengths in forming collaborations. They communicate through their network of relationships, and they resolve conflicts by norms of reciprocity. In network organizations, flexibility is moderate, as the actors are constrained by their pre-existent ties, but they're not more fully determined as in the hierarchical organization. So participants of network organization experience moderate to high levels of commitment. They find the climate to be one where mutual benefits are sought and where most of the firm preferences are interdependent, if not complementary. So you have this kind of interdependence that occurs within the network form of organization that creates a sense of integration. Different forms of network organization are feasible, and each form can address different kinds of problems. Rob Cross has a nice article describing different network forms of organization and the sorts of problems they are best suited for. Cross discusses networks within and between firms, but I think you can imagine sets of firms, even small firms, forming similar patterns of collaboration so as to compete with larger firms adopting this sort of internal patterning. The first firm and network form is on the far side here, and it's a core periphery structure where there are dense internal ties and extensions into the environment for novel information. These networks are like those proposed in organizational learning. There's a central hub where it can process and transfer information, and the external ties reach out into the environment, looking for novel information. This type of network is arguably well suited to addressing ambiguous problems in need of innovative solutions and finding ways to implement them in local conditions. One can imagine a network of organizations arranged in a similar way to address ambiguous problems. The second form of network is in the middle, and it has linked cliques that afford a modular response to problems. Here, a complex problem can be broken into components addressed by each unit or cluster, and they can be dealt with in a sequence. Again, a set of organizations can arrange their relationships in this manner to do the same. The final network here is closest to the edge of the screen on my side. The final network is a simple chain format, and there the network organization can deal with familiar problems with known responses. It's a format you might see in a streamlined organizational process model where efficiency is really an issue and the goal. Now clearly, the first two forms are more in line with what scholars mean by network organization. They have clusters, they have kind of interdependencies that exist across actors. However, it's helpful to consider the fact that even between the first two forms of network organization, there is some variance in form that might influence coordination and delivery within that kind of context. In addition to Powell's theoretical exposition on network organization, we have Goldsmith and Eggers' applied look at network organizing. Goldsmith and Eggers discuss U.S. government agencies. And again, I know this is a recurring case in the course to focus on U.S. government agencies. However, I think you'll find this sort of network organization may be relevant to many other governments around the world, as well as kind of small firms around the world. And perhaps they're especially salient as a form of organizing for markets at the margin, such as alliance networks on environmental sustainability. Now, when I say markets at the margin, what I mean is that most firms see environmental issues as secondary to their main interest in profit and survival. So altruistic goals, per se, may be more at the margin for a lot of firms. So it's a minor interest where other firms like a government agency or lab try to foster a network that facilitates change on this issue within firms. So they create an alliance that has kind of norms and exchange of information about energy-saving devices that they wouldn't find otherwise. And through that alliance, they pressure change. In the United States, all too often the agencies adopting network forms of organization are ones that have fewer resources and work to become more efficient. Or they're agencies that find themselves unable to perform the task required, or they want to distance themselves from the work they need performed. As such, the agency coordinates the web of service providers, or they hire a coordinator to do it for them. Now, many U.S. government agencies have adopted the network form of organizing. Government agencies contract out more and more tasks to private companies, for-profit and not-for-profit, and the belief that competition among providers will increase efficiency. Today, public agencies find themselves working in a world of partnerships and networks. They form alliances that include mixtures of agencies, large and small organizations, and so on. And this sort of network form of organization is seen as a viable alternative to large-scale corporations and large-scale hierarchical public bureaucracies. Goldsmith and Eggers describe how government agencies hire contractors and they hire subcontractors in an effort to provide a service. In those instances, the agency integrates and coordinates the web of service providers. But in other instances, the government agency either wants more distance with the service or they find a third-party provider who can coordinate better than they can. And here we see a slightly different structure where the government is one step removed. So government organizations find themselves working in a context of partnerships and alliances. In short, they're engaged in networks of smaller and larger organizations that span public and private sectors. And this is widely seen as an alternative form of organizing, particularly in comparison to large-scale corporations and public bureaucracies. Now, many of you can probably relate a variety of examples of network forms of organizing that you've observed in your respective industries and parts of the world. I'd love to hear about them on the forum. So I'll post probably a question asking people to kind of list some that they've been involved in. But here I'm going to give you a few examples. Goldsmith and Eggers describe the Golden Gate National Recreation Area and how it heavily relies on partners to take care of the parks and their services. Only 18% of park services rely on Forest Service employees, and the rest of it is done by partners that are contracted and subcontracted out as a way of providing efficient, cheaper service for the parks, which is arguably again a market at the margin for a lot of government agencies. But we can also consider more controversial cases like the Iraq War as an example where firms like Bechtel and Halliburton were contractors that maybe coordinated a variety of services and worked on the reconstruction effort. Now, I don't know the details of this operation or how it went, so it's all conjecture to some point. But in terms of network organization, it's an interesting case. One could arguably believe that there was little local trust in United States agencies. And you can ask, is this why contracting firms were used? And even then, was there much trust to make that network form of organizing helpful? Again, I have to plead ignorance here, but I think it's interesting to ponder how the network form of organizing was applied and how it performs in such a context. A final example for the network form of organizing is the Manhattan Project. Here, over a dozen universities and a network of scientists, engineers, military agencies, and service providers were brought together to create an atomic bomb. To many, the project was such a success technologically and scientifically that they now see it as a network form they want to repeat in other areas of knowledge creation. So for example, I'm often asked to study interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects, as well as centers that bring together heterogeneous sets of individuals and ask them to learn from one another. And through that kind of interaction, they create new ideas that they never would form if they stayed in their respective disciplinary silos. The model of organizing there is very much a network form, and many people in academia see it as a potentially powerful one for organizations engaged in today's knowledge economy. So now that we have a few examples under our belt, we can start to ask a few more substantive questions about the network form of organizations. A very simple one and a common sense one is, why do network forms of organization come about? In Chapter 1 of Goldsmith and Eggers, they relate a few reasons why governments use network organization, and we can extend it to firms more generally. The first reason that firms adopt a network form of organization is that they lack capacity to provide a service and because of that it has to rely on other firms. For the government, this means the use of for-profit and not-for-profit kinds of firms as contracts and subcontracts. The second reason is to provide more integrated services. If you outsource alone, it's not enough. All you've done is create 4 subcontractors and narrow channels to a service that would have existed via four government agencies anyway. Network organization calls upon agencies and subcontractors to join up or partner horizontally and vertically so as to provide more integrated services, a sort of one-stop shopping experience instead of a disparate 4-stop one. A third reason that they're arising is the digital revolution and the increase in technological capacity. Technology has made external partnering far more viable. Companies can share scheduling information on production, demand, shipments, transactions, etc. All sorts of information can be shared by digital means and often instantaneously, making a variety of partnerships across small, specialized firms possible. A final reason for the emergence and expanded relevance of network organization is demand. Citizens today want more options and choices, and they've become less tolerant of mediocre services. In a network organization, there are multiple contracts and subcontractors, many of whom compete to meet the demand and win consumer choices. By creating an efficient network organization or arrangement of complementary parts that provide this service in an efficient means, a lot of the consumers get what they want.